At bbc.com, The Media Show.
As tensions rise between the US and Europe over Greenland, we examine how international media has been reporting the story. We hear from Danish and American journalists on how the episode is being framed.
Weekend is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
BBC World Service, it's 6 hours GMT. Welcome to Weekend with Julia Morica. There's been renewed protest and anger in Minneapolis following another fatal shooting by federal immigration agents.
Donald Trump, I call on you once again. Remove this force from Minnesota. They are sowing chaos and violence.
But the federal government disputes the version of events put out by local officials and accuses them of encouraging unrest.
They need to evaluate their rhetoric, their conversations, and their encouragement of such violence against our citizens and our law enforcement officers.
We go live to Myanmar, where the third and final round of parliamentary elections is taking place, and we hear from the directors of the K-pop film that's been nominated for 2 Oscars.
Okay, let's do this.
That's all coming up here on Weekend after the World News.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. The fatal shooting of a man by Border Patrol agents during immigration raids in the US city of Minneapolis has sparked renewed protests and more finger-pointing by the Trump administration and local officials. The Department of Homeland Security said the man, named as 37-year-old Alex Pretty, had a gun and threatened officers. Video footage on social media show him with a phone in his hand, and moments later he was bundled to the ground by 6 officers before multiple shots are fired. He did not appear to be armed. Tom Bateman is at the scene of the shooting.
A lot of people laying flowers, they've come to light candles and laying them, writing messages, chanting Alex Pretty's name. And I spoke to one woman who described an atmosphere of fear over recent weeks as ICE agents have been carrying out these raids, and saying that she felt she just had to come down here when she saw the video of him being killed. There are now multiple videos of the angles here, and there have been hundreds of protesters out, but a lot more anger being expressed. And that talks to the way that you now have this extremely polarized narrative about what happened here.
Officials in Minneapolis insist the state should lead the investigation into the incident, but say federal agents blocked them from doing so. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said the federal government could not be trusted to lead the investigation. A massive winter storm has dumped snow and freezing rain on the US states of New Mexico and Texas as it spreads across the country towards the northeast. Forecasters warn temperatures may reach as low as -40 degrees Celsius. There are already power outages, especially in Texas and Louisiana. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, issued this warning.
This storm is going to produce heavy snow. It's going to produce dangerous freezing rain and ice and life-threatening wind chills that will be sustained for days. Power outages, road closures, and other impacts have already started to impact the Midwest, the South, and the East Coast.
The third and final round of elections is taking place in dozens of constituencies in Myanmar. The vote has been described as neither free nor fair. Jonathan Head is at a polling station in eastern Myanmar.
Everybody here knows the military party is pretty much guaranteed to win, and the kind of mood you get with people here is interesting. A lot of people are voting just out of a normal sense of duty, but many of them are also voting out of fear. They fear what might happen to them if they don't vote. No one wants to talk about the election. We've had so many military and police intelligence officers on our tail. It made it almost impossible to talk to people, and every time we did, people were really scared. They literally didn't want to say anything about the election apart from, we feel we have no choice, we have to vote.
You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. An Iranian news agency is reporting that the government will fully restore international internet access on Sunday. It was cut off during a crackdown on nationwide protests that began last month. The blackout has made it hard to confirm how many people were killed during the unrest. The US-based human rights activist news agency says over 4,000 people have died. American rock climber Alex Honnold has succeeded in his attempt to scale a 500-metre-high Taipei skyscraper with no rope or protective equipment. It took him just over an hour and 31 minutes. Stopping only to clean the dirt off his hands and shoes and to greet fans watching through the windows of Taipei 101, Honnold braved strong winds and sloping steel and glass. Speaking afterwards, he expressed his thoughts while climbing the building.
For me personally, the biggest challenge was staying calm. I don't know, having the crowd, having the whole experience, having all the people around, it just makes it feel a little more intense. And so I think starting felt, I was a little more nervous getting off the ground. And then as I climbed, I relaxed more and more. I was like, oh, this is so fun. I mean, this is why I do it. It was incredible.
2 giant pandas are on display in Tokyo for the final day before their return to China on Tuesday. Japan risks being without a giant panda on its shores for the first time in more than half a century because of an ongoing diplomatic row with China. Beijing lends pandas to other countries but maintains ownership, including over any cubs they produce. In basketball, the Chicago Bulls have officially retired the jersey of one of their best ever players, Derrick Rose. The NBA team hung his #1 jersey on the rafters next to that of legend Michael Jordan. Rose becomes only the 5th Bull honoured with a jersey retirement. In 2011, he was NBA's youngest ever and most valuable player at just 22. BBC News.
It's 6 minutes past 6 GMT. Welcome to Weekend from the BBC World Service with me, Julian Morica. There's been another fatal shooting by federal immigration agents on the streets of the US city of Minneapolis, the second this month. Local police said a 37-year-old man, Alex Pretty, who was a nurse, had been killed. The exact circumstances of the killing are disputed, but it took place amid continuing protests against the attempts by federal agents to find and detain illegal immigrants. Phone camera footage showed the man being wrestled to the ground by agents before multiple shots are fired by them. Homeland Security officials maintain the man had a gun and threatened officers, and that a Border Patrol agents fired in self-defense. This is what Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino said.
We will not allow violence against our law enforcement officers, and we need state and local help to help us coordinate to get violent criminals off the streets. Mayor Fry and Chief O'Hare just a few minutes ago did the opposite of that by omitting the fact that the suspect had a gun and magazines full of ammunition in what looks like a situation, again, where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement.
But the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, issued a furious condemnation of the behavior of federal agents in his state and a plea to President Trump.
Donald Trump, I call on you once again. Remove this force from Minnesota. They are sowing chaos and violence. We've seen deadly violence from federal agents again and again and again. But in contrast to that, on these frozen streets, what you witnessed yesterday was the best of Minnesota, peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights. And I attended in the church basement hundreds of Minnesotans from all faith packing care packages for families that have been ripped apart. Despite the horrific acts by this federal government, Minnesotans are standing up for the rule of law. They're protesting loudly and urgently, but peacefully. It must stay that way, Minnesota.
Well, Patrick Kulikan is editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. I asked him what we knew about what happened.
We know that a young person named Alex Jeffrey Pretty, actually he's a 37-year-old man who is an ICU nurse at the Veterans Hospital, was recording events in the Whittier neighborhood of Minneapolis. He was confronted by federal officers. Then he appears to have helped the women who had been pushed down by officers. He got into a scuffle and was on the ground. He has a permit to carry a handgun, and he did have one. He has no criminal record. The gun was taken from him, and shortly after that, he was shot a number of times and killed. There is significant conflict between the local authorities here who attempted to begin an investigation when they were blocked from doing so by the federal government. And this is the third shooting now in 3 weeks. But I will say the resistance, as evidenced during a Friday march in sub-zero temperatures, tens of thousands of people, the resistance, I think, is only getting stronger through these events.
There are conflicting accounts of it already. You mentioned the fact that he had a license and was carrying a gun. Kristi Noem, the US Homeland Security Secretary, has talked of him approaching federal agents with a semi-automatic handgun. Was he holding the gun? Do we know that?
No, I mean, there's other video that shows him with a phone recording, and his gun is holstered. And in fact, they took the holstered gun from him while he was on the ground, and they were beating him. So this certainly contradicts their account that he showed up there. Stephen Miller, the president's top policy advisor, called him an assassin. But that is not borne out by the video, nor apparently by his personality, based on what we know so far.
How does this get investigated from here?
Well, as people here, and I think around the United States, are very skeptical that the federal government will do a fair and thorough investigation. And like I said, our Minnesota's own investigative agency, which is called the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, were blocked from the site. So at this point, again, we have a conflict between jurisdictions and a federal government that is certainly, all evidence points to them operating in the whims of the President of the United States.
But with those two separate jurisdictions coming forward with such different versions of events, I wonder if there is a way of arriving at what would be regarded as an independent scrutiny.
I think we're going to have to rely on journalists and the public to do that. Certainly it is within the power of the local authorities to conduct their own investigation and to bring charges. But there's a lot of practical obstacles to that, both in legal precedent, but also just in the sheer fact of not having physical evidence from the scene.
On the streets now, what's the atmosphere as a result of what's happened?
It's very somber, as you might imagine. We had a reporter where there was 1,000 people gathered for a vigil at Whittier Park, which is in the neighborhood where Mr. Petty was killed. But it turned into a march, and people chanting and banging on dumpsters and so forth. And so I think there's a sense of sadness and fear, no doubt, but there's also a sense that Minneapolis and Minnesotans are in this together.
Patrick Cooligan, editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. Well, the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, spoke to reporters about the shooting and made accusations against Democratic Party leaders in Minnesota.
They need to evaluate their rhetoric, their conversations, and their encouragement of such violence against our citizens and our law enforcement officers. I'll remind you that Governor Walz today in his press conference said that our officers were not even law enforcement, which is a lie. He's called them the Gestapo. He's encouraged residents and citizens and violent rioters to resist.
Well, Andy Smith is a Democratic congressman in Minnesota's House of Representatives. I began by asking for his reaction to the shooting.
Of course, the first is outrage. It has been an incredibly difficult month and weeks for our state of Minnesota, and this is another shocking but not surprising escalation from our federal government. It's, to be quite frank, shocking, and we are trying to get through this together. It has been a very difficult day as I talk to you. This is the end of one of the hardest days in Minnesota history. There's been some beautiful things of our community banding together, but of course we're here because of a terrible act enacted by an authoritarian government against its own people.
How sure can you be of the facts just now?
I don't know if I should say thankfully, but in this particular instance, we have cameras from several angles. We have sworn affidavits from eyewitnesses, of what exactly took place in one of the most brutal shootings in our state's history, especially considering that it was federal agents that did it. 6 to 7 federal agents that gang tackled after macing a man and then shot him while he was on the ground. And we also know that our federal government is not reliable anymore. It has been lying to us for weeks about several incidents and immediately started lying about this one. So, of course, we want an investigation to take place, and we want that investigation to be thorough and well done. And that means having our our local and state bureaus involved with our federal bureaus. But the evidence in those videos, and I'm sure many of your listeners have seen them, to me are quite clear.
You're very critical of the federal government and their version of events, but I will put it to you nonetheless that the US Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, has said that the man who was shot approached federal agents with 9mm semi-automatic handgun. Officers attempted to disarm him, and she says he then reacted violently, with an officer then firing defensive shots. That's her version of events. It's the federal government's version of events. What do you say?
To be quite frank, it's lies. I encourage your listeners to look at the videos themselves. We have videos from many angles, from leading up to, the moment of it, and after this incident that simply do not align with that story. And we have seen for weeks that DHS has lied. They've lied about detaining children, and we know that they are. We have evidence of that. They've lied about taking U.S. citizens into custody. We know that they have done that. They've lied about entering schools when we know they have done that. And this is the latest edition of what we know authoritarian regimes do from around the world, in Iran and Russia. We're used to those governments lying about them oppressing their people. It's just something that we are not used to in the United States of America.
Are you really comparing the government in Washington with those in Iran and Russia?
Of course, not to the same level, but there's clearly an authoritarian streak that is growing in the Washington federal government and is being brought against the people of Minnesota.
Clearly, we're in a situation where you very passionately put forward what you have done in the last few moments. I put to you what the US Homeland Security Secretary has said. In other words, you are miles apart in terms of your version of what's happened here. And you talked about the need for an investigation. How do we get to the point where something that is independent, that people across the board, whatever their political view is, can look at that investigation and trust the outcome of it?
You know, we had some great evidence of that just this past summer. Here in the United States, we had 2 horrible politically motivated assassinations. One of the Speaker of the Minnesota House in the body that I served, Melissa Hortman, and one in the shooting of a conservative talk show host in Charlie Kirk in Utah. In both of those instances, local, state, and federal authorities worked together to apprehend the shooters involved and to bring evidence, and those trials are now ongoing in our judicial system. In this instance, and in the shooting of Renee Good a couple weeks ago, the federal government has denied access for our Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and they have refused to even open investigations into these showings of force. So the very first step would be to open investigations like we did with those other shootings that involve all agencies, both local, state, and federal.
Andy Smith, Democratic Congressman in Minnesota's House of Representatives. Now, today in Myanmar, voters are casting ballots in the final phase of national and regional elections. The elections are being run by the military-appointed Union Election Commission in the middle of a civil war, and many people in areas where armed conflict persists have been excluded from the vote. The election follows the 2021 military coup, which dissolved the Popular National League for Democracy and detained its leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, and has been widely criticised by the United Nations, rights groups and foreign governments as lacking legitimacy and genuine competition. Well, the BBC's Jonathan Head is at a polling station in Nyongshui in Shan State. What's happening where you are, Jonathan?
Well, it's quiet. We've had polling's been going on since 6 o'clock this morning, so it's more than 6 hours. It was reasonably busy here earlier on. I can't really judge turnout. It seemed quite low to me, judging by what I'd have expected here. Very orderly. If you looked at what we've seen this morning, you would think this is a really well-organised, genuine democratic process. And indeed, the Union Election Commission was there And we asked them about it being free and fair, and they were very defensive and said, of course it's free and fair, you can ask anyone. Well, if you actually try to ask anybody their opinion of the election here, they run away. People are too scared to say anything about the election, to express any opinion. And what's preceded this and the two previous stages of the election is a sort of campaign stifled by fear, restrictions, and a sheer lack of choice, because the parties that were most popular in the last election 5 years ago are barred, including Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, that here in Shan State, like in the rest of the country, got by far the most seats in the last election. So without them, and with all these other restrictions, with very tough laws restricting freedom of expression, the military's own party is guaranteed to win. Everyone voting here knows that. It's been really weird trying to get some sense of a campaign, because they've almost not campaigned at all, and the few events that have happened we've tried to get to, we've been barred. We've been stopped at checkpoints, we've been tailed, we've had officials on our tails the whole time, even going out onto Inle Lake. We tried to get away just to talk to some fishermen. We were chased by military intelligence officials. They were with us the whole time. So behind the whole election, this apparently normal election, is a real cloud of fear that affects the whole country.
So the outcome not in doubt. I mean, briefly, where does this take the country in the days and weeks to come?
It will be a continuation of the current military government, which is despised by much of the country, with civilian clothes. But it does broaden the personalities involved. There will be a parliament. Yes, there'll be military, most of them, but you might just see at some way down the tracks, and this is clearly what the main foreign partner behind this election, China, is hoping for, perhaps a move to a broader government, perhaps a move to reach out and to make peace with the armed opposition, but we cannot see that yet.
Jonathan, thank you, as ever, Jonathan Head in Myanmar. Now, have you got 20 million euros to spare for a property investment? Well, good news, because the majestic Palazzo Cardario on the Grand Canal in Venice is up for grabs. You will recognise it because it's been painted by Claude Monet, among others. The 15th century Renaissance palace comes with 9 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms, but it's proving difficult to shift on the market, partly because of rumours that it's haunted and there are a string of untimely violent deaths and even murders linked to it. Well, my colleague Rebecca Kesby spoke to the Italian architect, historian and filmmaker Francesco da Mosto, who gave her some of those grisly details.
The palace is something that is really fantastic. From the outside, is a Gothic building with so many round marble coming from all over the world. There are nearly 100 pieces of marble of different colors. And it's so thin, and it seems that it's standing on the water of the Grand Canal like a miracle. And how much the reflection of the water gets the colors of the marble.
It's so beautiful, but I mean, it's huge, isn't it? It's got so many rooms. Do we know what it looks like on the inside?
Yes. I went once, and I remember there was a room with so many tiles. There was an incredible fireplace, and there are works of art of every kind. And all the wood inside is carved with different ways. So it's something that you feel to enter in another time. It's something that really you can understand how much wealth there was in that period in Venice.
Listening to you describe this fabulous building, it's a bit of a surprise that the estate agents are having problems selling it. But then we come to its rather troubled history. There have been a number of quite suspicious deaths connected to this building, I think.
Yeah, the story is incredible, because everything started well when this Giovanni Dario, he was a merchant, he made it building. But he had a daughter that she married with the Bernardo family. The problem that this Bernardo was working for the government, but he had problem and he was pushed out of the Council of the Ten. And then he was killed. So the wife suicided, throwing herself on the water, and the son died in Creta. So from that moment, it seemed all the town thought that the palace was damned.
And the deaths have continued right up until the modern day.
It's incredible. There is one that was Arbit Abdoli, was a merchant from Armenia, that he went in bankrupt. So he sold to an English that he went in bankrupt too. Then there was a billionaire from America that he had to escape to Mexico because he was homosexual, and he suicided with his lover. Then there was the singer Mario del Monaco that has a car accident and he cannot sing anymore. Then there is two guys of the group, The Who. The manager started to think that there were ghosts inside the palace, that they were making him going crazy. So he started to take more drugs and drugs. And at the end, he came back to Great Britain and he died there.
Goodness.
And the last thing is playing the bass in The Who, that he died of heart attack just after having rented after a week.
Some extraordinary stories. Italian architect, historian, filmmaker Francesco D'Amosto speaking to Rebecca Kesby. Well, now to an animated film that's topped the charts right across the globe since its release last summer. K-pop Demon Hunters has become one of Netflix's biggest hits. It tells the story of a female Korean pop trio who must save the world from evil forces. It's won a slew of awards, and this week it was nominated for 2 Oscars. I've been speaking to the movie's directors, Maggie Kang and Chris Applehands.
It started really just as a demon hunter group set in Korea, and it didn't feel like enough of a concept. And so just went down a list of other Korean things, and K-pop felt like a good thing to mash that with.
Okay, let's do this. Yeah, something about when you come for the crowd that's so humble and high. Completely bigger than bunch of continuation.
It felt pretty exciting, and there was opportunities to kind of show music video type of fight sequences and obviously integrate music into the story. And then Chris came on, and that's when we really started to root the mythology in Korean shamanism, which has been around for hundreds of years. And Korean shamans are actually historically mostly women. And they would do these rituals of song and dance to ward off bad spirits from their communities. So it felt like the right thing to kind of ground our mythology into.
Chris, come in with your take on the creative process and what we end up seeing here.
When Maggie and I were talking about the concept, it really became this big question of what do K-pop and demon hunting have to do with each other? And that led us to the premise of just the power of music. And this is very clear in the K-pop community. There's this beautiful relationship between the fans and the performers, a real bond, and there's a real sense of community across national borders in the K-pop fandom, from Brazil to Korea to Russia to wherever. And so we sort of decided, yeah, let's dramatize the power of music.
I haven't been at my best, but I know we can win tomorrow. We just have to sing the right song. And Takedown isn't...
It's okay, Rumi.
We agree.
It's not the song that's gonna connect all our fans.
It can't even connect us.
And let's give these women a sort of supernatural voices and abilities, and let's make a thing that we made up called the Honmun, which is this way that the power of the fans and the performance comes together, creates this kind of shield that protects the world.
The film Parasite has been quite influential in your thinking here, isn't it?
Of course. Chris and I bonded over our love of director Bong Joon-ho's work. Bong is able to take a very emotionally difficult scene, the grief of the loss of a child that this family has to go through, and he mashes it with physical comedy. So we just wanted to create a film that just bounced around a little bit tonally. So our animation reviews were kind of hilarious because at one point we would be talking about some very ridiculous physical comedy that our characters do. And then the next scene that we would be reviewing was the Dark Night of the Soul moment, where our character is just at her lowest point in her character journey. So we just tried it. And it was a lot of years of balancing and rebalancing these tones to see if they will work. And I think we found that balance ultimately, and that is what the fans are really reacting to.
The directors of K-pop Demon Hunters, Maggie Kang and Chris Applehands. A little bit later on in the programme, you can hear a slightly longer version of that conversation. Also, sticking with the Oscars and films, we will be asking whether quite a lot of films these days are just a little bit too long. You're with Weekend from the BBC World Service. The news headlines in a moment.
This is the BBC World Service, uncovering gripping stories from around the world. episode by episode.
They rubbed menthol ointment on his face and put onions in front of his eyes so that he would fake cry.
When we left, there was this wonderful feeling, but it was only the beginning of a nightmare.
It's a story of fame, power, and vengeance, echoing far beyond India's borders.
I've seen coups and evacuations, but I've never seen something as intriguing as this.
The moment I saw him, I knew he was an evil guy. Very evil man.
World of Secrets is where untold stories are unveiled and hidden realities are exposed.
I want truth and justice and for other people to not be hurt.
To listen, search World of Secrets online or wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
It's 6:30 GMT. This is Weekend from the BBC World Service. Still to come, shark attacks in Sydney, Australia. Why has there been a recent surge in such incidents? And mining for so-called battery metals around the world. We examine the politics of it and ask if the process can be cleaned up. That's all here on Weekend after the world news.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. The fatal shooting of a man by Border Patrol agents during immigration raids in the US city of Minneapolis has sparked more protests and anger. The Department of Homeland Security said the man, named as 37-year-old Alex Pretty, had a gun and threatened officers. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz described the administration's version of events as nonsense and lies. Following the shooting, the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has called for the resignation of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. He also demanded the firing of Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino. A massive winter storm has dumped snow and freezing rain in many US states as it spreads across the country towards the northeast. The unusually brutal weather affects more than half of the American population. More than 100,000 people are without electricity. An Iranian news agency close to the regime is reporting that international internet access in the country will be restored on Sunday. The government cut off access during a crackdown on nationwide protests that began late last month. Sudan's Attorney General says the country has opened criminal cases against more than 120 foreign mercenaries fighting with the Rapid Support Forces against the army. Sudanese authorities accuse the RSF of recruiting foreign fighters from Chad, South Sudan, Ethiopia and Colombia. The American rock climber Alex Honnold has succeeded in his attempt to scale the 500-metre high skyscraper Taipei 101 in Taiwan with no rope or protective equipment. The daring feat, which was live-streamed on TV, took him just over 1.5 hours. And 2 giant pandas are on display in Tokyo for the final day before their return to China. The zoo introduced a lottery for the final tickets for people to say farewell. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Morica with Weekend. Coming up later this hour, 4 shark attacks in little more than 48 hours in Australia's biggest city, Sydney, including the death of a 12-year-old boy, more with one of the country's best experts on the subject. And we speak to the author of a new book on the global struggle over the lucrative supply of battery metals. But 2 guests are with me for the rest of the programme. As ever, they are Patricia Cohen, global economics correspondent for the New York Times, who's here with me in London. Patricia, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
And in Berlin is Alan Posner, journalist and columnist for the German newspaper Die Welt. Alan, welcome. Good morning to you.
Morning, thanks.
A word of introduction to you both. You're trying to explain the world through the lens of economics, Patricia. Is that the sum of it?
Yes, and
good luck with that.
Yes. I have to say, I've been a journalist for a long time, and this is one of the best jobs I've had. I've been to about 30 countries in the last couple of years. So, trying to take something that seems more intimidating than it is and breaking it down to kind of what it means to you every day and in your paycheck, explaining why prices go up, why, maybe tough to find a job, what's going on in government policy. So, and I get to travel around the world doing it. So.
I mean, so often, as you say, those day-to-day concerns can be linked to some of the biggest geopolitical issues of our time, can't they?
Well, what we're seeing now is an extremely unusual period. I mean, we're really in a kind of, historical transformation of the global economic system as well as the political system. And it's very confusing, and nobody really knows exactly where we're going. It's hard when you're in the middle of a major transition to kind of see where you are. So as much as we can try and provide some guidepost along this way, is we're living in extraordinary times in that sense. And it's confusing.
So the lens is currently economics, but it's not always been economics, has it? I mean, your reporting over the years has taken you to all manner of different topics.
Oh my goodness.
parts
Well,
of the world.
I mean, I've worked at the New York Times now for more than 25 years, but I've probably had about 10 jobs in that time, including one of my favorites, which was I was theater editor. And so London is a very good place for that. So I'm also looking forward to our discussion about movies later, whether they're too long, because I remember when I was going to the theater, I always used to think almost every show I saw was about a half hour too long. So
Good. Well, we will look forward to your contribution when that comes around. Talking of lots of different jobs, Alan, I mean, you definitely tick that box as well, don't you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was a communist agitator. I was a school teacher. I was a, oh goodness, still am actually rock and roll singer. I was a translator. I was a freelance author, then a journalist. So yeah, and I agree totally with Patricia that it's a great job. You get to meet so many interesting people, see so many things, and you get paid for it. It's amazing.
Because you gave up teaching, I think, a while back, didn't you? Quite a long time ago.
Oh, goodness.
And that's
Right.
when you moved into the world of writing and translating.
Oh yeah, well, goodness, that was must have been that gives you an idea of my age. I just got bored. I mean, teachers have to teach the same thing every year, basically, and there's and students make the same mistakes, and you have to be a great character to be a teacher. You have to have patience and compassion and whatnot. And I felt, no, I'm just not a good enough character. I'm shallow enough to be a journalist, though.
What's the world of writing been for you in terms of the areas you've most concentrated on, including the books you've written? Where's the focus tended to be?
I wish I knew. Julian, I'm a jack of all trades, and they tend to when they can't find anyone to do anything at their, for whatever reason, they say, "Oh, can't you do it?" And I say, "So how much time have I got to sort of work myself into this subject?" They say, "Oh, well, half an hour." At the moment, I mean, I've been to Kosovo, for instance. I think we're going to hear something from Kosovo.
We will hear from Kosovo later.
I've been all around. The Balkans, but I've also been to the Galapagos. I've been up to Norway, but that was as a travel writer. And at the moment, I'm knocking around in Germany, looking at the student activities of the far right AfD, who are trying to recreate the sort of the Kirk impulse. If you get my idea, my meaning.
I do.
On campus, I really, as I said, it just sort of. They ring you up and say, "Can't you do this?" And you say, "Oh, sounds interesting. I'll go and do it."
And how does the music fit into all of that?
It doesn't.
Don't talk yourself down
only
musically, Alan.
I'm a rock singer. I try to sound like something like Mick Jagger or Eric Burden, if that means anything to anyone. But I did write a book about Bob Dylan last year, about his songs, and I do a show where I present his songs and talk about the book. So this keeps me in a different way, sort of on my toes and interested and doing stuff that I really love.
Well, it's great to hear from both of you at the start of the programme. Patricia Cohen, Alan Posner with me throughout, and further comments from them to come. We start our conversations in Australia. As I hinted a moment ago, an Australian boy who was bitten by a shark in Sydney Harbour last week has died in hospital. 12-year-old Nico Antic had been jumping off a rock with friends when he was attacked by what's believed to have been a bull shark. It was one of 4 shark attacks on Australia's east coast in just 48 hours. The attacks followed several days of heavy rain, which experts say creates perfect conditions for the aggressive and unpredictable bull sharks because they like murky water. The attacks have left many of the beaches closed this week ahead of the country's Australia Day long weekend. Well, before the news of Nico's death was announced, the BBC spoke to these beachgoers in Sydney for their thoughts about the situation.
I feel a bit scared about the shark attack in Sydney.
Very tragic for everybody involved.
Well, I think it's awful. I just feel really bad for all the families. It's really scary.
To hear of the shark attacks is pretty unsettling and disconcerting.
Very unusual to have 4 in the space of just over 48 hours.
Perfectly happy getting back in the water, with a bit of caution in there.
I think I would think twice for maybe 2 seconds, and then I'd be like, I don't care, I'm going in the water.
I mean, we just need to be educated about when to go in, when to not go in.
I'm of the opinion that, like, when we go into the ocean, we're kind of, like, messing with their house.
I mean, I think just maybe more awareness, like shark safety, I think particularly for tourists, and maybe more knowledge on that.
Let's speak live to Chris Pepin-Neff in Sydney, Associate Professor in Public Policy at the university there. Chris, welcome to the programme. Extraordinary statistics in the last few days. How unusual is this?
This is extreme. This is a period of activity and obviously of tragedy that we've not seen before. I specifically study clusters of shark bites. That's what I do. And I've never seen anything like it anywhere in the world.
And is it possible to say why it's happening on this scale just now?
I think we're getting closer. Even in the last week, we were able to look at, so there was 127 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. That's the most rain Sydney's had in 38 years in one day. And it's especially unusual for it to happen in the summer when the water is already warm and the bull sharks are already in the harbor. So when that water came in it almost creates like a fjord at the surface of the water where you've got like an inch of fresh water and then the rest is salt water. So there's like a little biodiversity explosion, and then the bait fish come in and the bull sharks go after the bait fish.
And hence the attacks take place. And I described bull sharks at the start of the item as being aggressive and unpredictable, which is where the risk to humans comes in, clearly.
Yeah, bull sharks are biters. They're, because of their size, and you said it right. I mean, this has really been a tragic week. Working in this space is not easy, and I think the loss of this 12-year-old is really upset everyone in the community, and so it shouldn't be that dangerous to jump off the rocks into the water. Like, you should be able to do that and be okay and have fun as a 12-year-old. And so as we cope with that and look at the beach conditions and the ocean conditions, that's sort of in the back of our mind.
How best do you tackle this and get the balance between, the understandable desire, particularly of younger people like this 12-year-old, to jump into the sea because that's a fun thing to do, but also make sure that the creatures who are in the ocean are looked after as best they can because it's not their fault. How do you get the balance here?
That's a really good question. I think telling people that the ocean and the beach and even the harbor is the wild, and it's a dynamic ecosystem. It's always evolving. And then there are these peaks of risk, the extra rain. We know that bull sharks come in at 45 millimeters of rain. There's a sort of bounty of bull sharks that come to the surface. And in this case, we had 127 millimeters of rain in one day. So we knew they would be there. So even though they are unpredictable and they are biters, we know enough to tell people to stay out of the water. And I think we need to do a better job of that.
Chris, I'm going to bring my guests in because neither would claim to be shark experts, but I know they're curious to hear more from you. Alan, what's on your mind as Chris Pepin-Neff is live in Sydney?
Just one thing, I remember I was swimming with a group of people snorkeling in the Galapagos Island, and suddenly a shark, I don't think it wasn't a bull shark, it was a reef shark, was under us, and we were sort of going to the guy in the boat, "Oh, help, there's a shark," and he was saying, "Don't worry, they don't feed at this time of day," and that was it. And but that's not like that with the bull sharks. They feed all the time.
Bull sharks, it's interesting. Bull sharks usually would feed at night.
Exactly,
when I go out,
he told us, yeah.
Yeah, it's highly unusual. But again, this did happen toward dusk. with this incident, and it's also slightly different when the bait fish activity is different. So it can alter animal behavior, and that's another thing to sort of be on the watch out for, because if they're biting and they're doing it in an odd way, then it can be extra dangerous.
Were you scared, Alan, at that moment when that Galapagos
At that
incident
moment, I
took
was
place?
terrified. I mean, you're snorkeling around looking at great coral fish or whatever, and suddenly there's this great big shark under you. And I didn't quite believe the guy, but he seemed so relaxed about the shark that I then swam after it, stupidly enough, but nothing happened.
He was relaxed because he...
I think you're about to get some advice from Chris, Alan.
Alan, don't swim after the shark.
I won't do it again,
No.
I promise.
Patricia.
I was going to say the guy was relaxed because he was in the boat, right? So you mentioned that there was a lot of rain, an unusual amount, and I'm wondering to what degree can we make a link between climate change and both in this instance, I know sharks are your specialty, but they're kind of second and third and fourth order effects from climate change.
Oh, absolutely. This is when we look at these, we're really looking at shark activity, human activity, and environmental conditions. And the combination, I mean, we know that climate change is changing the water temperature. And the water temperature in like 20 years of studying clusters of shark bites, the answer is usually water temperature. And as climate change warms the water, moves the bait fish and the sharks follow toward the inshore areas, it's sort of the sweet spot, and with the extreme heat and the weather, we get in the water at the same time that they're coming toward the shore. So I say to all my academic colleagues, I don't know why they don't talk about shark attacks more in climate change narratives, because people resonate with it.
What's the situation regarding nets and other forms of physical barriers, which I know have been debated in Sydney and other parts of Australia before? I mean, what's the situation with those now?
It's a weird one. In Sydney, in the harbor, where there's no real waves and seaweed, you can have a full enclosure, just a regular net like you would. We call it at a low energy beach. And those are safe and those are good and they're in year round. But there are these other nets that they put out in front of the beaches and that are called shark nets. And they just don't work. And the government loves them. They've been in the water for almost 100 years. But the problem is that when fish get caught in the net,
was in my mind was particularly off the back of those different voices we heard from the beaches of Sydney. People wary, of course, but also quite a lot of them saying, okay, yeah, we get it, but we're still going to go for a swim. How do you shift that thinking if you feel you need to shift that thinking?
It's interesting. I always say there's three narratives we need to look at. The fish is the fish, the swimmer is a land animal, and the ocean is the wild. And if we can hold all three of those, then we've got an informed approach to getting in the water. And a lot of people have it. I mean, it's Australia. This is the wild. It's, Australians know how to deal with the bush. They know how to deal with snakes and spiders. And so, the shark conversation in a lot of ways is very strange sometimes because Australians know better, but politicians haven't caught up to that.
Very good to have your expertise, Chris. Thank you very much, Chris Pepin-Neff there in Sydney. You're listening to Weekend from the BBC World Service. A reminder of our main news. The family of a man shot dead by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis say he cared deeply about people and was upset by President Trump's immigration crackdown in the U.S. city. A massive winter storm is sweeping through several U.S. states, bringing snow, freezing rain and power outages. And the American rock climber Alex Honnold has succeeded in his attempt to scale the 500-metre-high skyscraper Taipei 101 in Taiwan without ropes or protective gear. And we will discuss that a little bit later on in the programme. Now, they are known as battery metals. They include cobalt, lithium, copper, and tin. They're used in electric vehicles and renewable energy storage, but their supply is becoming scarce as countries are desperate to move away from fossil fuels. Well, my next guest has written a new book that discusses the geopolitical struggle for the global supply of these metals. The book is called The Elements of Power, a story of war, technology, and the dirtiest supply chain on Earth. And the author, Nicholas Niarchos, is live, joining us from the United States. Nicholas, welcome. Good morning from London.
Good morning.
And thank you for being up at an unreasonable hour to talk to us.
We have a snowstorm coming. Yes.
Indeed you do, yes, as I mentioned a moment ago. I mentioned the geopolitical struggle for the global supply of these metals. Just how intense is that struggle just now?
I think that struggle is seen on many, many different fronts. I think, you see it both in Trump's engagement with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, with this peace deal, which took place on the 4th of December. And then you also see it with the push for Greenland. A lot of what's happening in Greenland is to do with critical metals and China's dominance of that field. China controls something like 90% of the refining of some of these metals. So this is something that the US has been unconcerned about for many years. And then suddenly during the end of the first Trump administration, they basically started realizing that China dominates in battery production. And if electric vehicles are going to be the next wave of vehicles that everybody buys, and China controls that technology, it's certainly very, very risky geostrategically.
You mentioned two parts of the world. I want to get on to the DR Congo, certainly, but because Greenland is so much in people's minds at the moment for reasons we know only too well, let's stay with that for a second or two. What is there under this heading, and how much difference could it make to the people who get control of it?
Well, it's 1.5 million metric tons of proven rare earth elements, potentially expanding to 36 million tons with further exploration. So there are things like cobalt, which is in the DRC as well, graphite, and of course rare earths, which are these kind of complicated things like dysprosium, terbium, neodymium, and praseodymium. These are things that go into magnets and various different, sort of uses, things like vehicle traction motors and wind turbine generators and things like that.
So for those who are able to get at these things and then mine them and turn them into the kinds of essential equipment that so many people around the world now use, there is a huge amount of money in that, and there's the politics that goes with that.
Yes, I mean, I think that your question hit on a point. Those who are able to get at them. I mean, yes. These things are.
I phrased that very carefully.
Yes, exactly. I think in Greenland, it's incredibly cold, which is one of the most important things, and also they're just sort of very, very remote. And difficult to access. In Africa, they're more geostrategically complicated to access because China has such a foothold in Africa, especially in the DR Congo.
Well, let me go there for a moment, and then I'll bring in Patricia and Alan to talk to you as well. The DR Congo deal you mentioned, this was at the end of last year. The Trump administration brokered a peace deal between the DR Congo and Rwanda, and this linked regional stability to this partnership which granted American firms priority access to some of the minerals that we've been talking about, including cobalt, but also copper, lithium, rare earths. And again, that Chinese dominance was clearly in the American minds at that point. Where does that deal take the issue more broadly, do you think? And how realistic is it that it can proceed in the way that it's been put down on paper?
Once again, a well-posed question. I think the realism, look, the deal has been fairly well composed, but the realism is, or the realistic way of looking at it is that the DRC will not necessarily the history of such deals is that the DRC has reneged on almost every single one of them. So including the big deal with China, which is what they're doing right now. They're reneging on it by moving towards the US. So do we believe that the DRC would go for a better deal if China were to offer them that? I believe so. I think that this is a somewhat desperate attempt to shore up power in Kinshasa, because the administration is looking very weak after the Rwandan occupation of huge parts of the eastern part of the DRC.
And clearly the peace there is very fragile as we speak as well. Let me bring my guest in. Patricia, what's on your mind with regards to all of this?
Well, two things. First of all, what I wanted to ask is, it seems to me there's two issues that come up in this, and there's some confusion about it. One is the supply of the minerals themselves and getting at them, which you were talking about. And the other is the issue of processing them, of which China clearly is dominant, and I think has something like 90% of the processing capabilities. And so I'm wondering if you could just make clearer what is the more pressing shortage, at least from a Western perspective, in terms of trying to shore up capabilities.
Well, I mean, if you look, if you're sitting in Washington as the Trump administration and you're suspicious of China, and you know there's good reason to be so, you would say that both things are equally pressing. But I guess if you know, the US has basically no refining capability, and there is very, very little refining capability for these metals. You know, there's a cobalt refinery, fairly small, in Finland. You know, there's another small cobalt refinery, lithium refinery in Georgia. You know, these things are minuscule on the scale to what China has done. And, you know, the rare earths and critical metal extraction, that part of the supply chain is much easier accessed if you're sitting in Washington today. So I guess that would be the priority, just in terms of ease. But obviously, if they were able to scale up refining very, very quickly, which I don't think they will do, that would also be a priority.
Alan.
Yeah, thank you. And there's so many aspects of your book. You also talk about these sort of artisan miners, you know, child labor and so on, the Congo, who get the cobalt out of unsafe mines and so on. That's, I think, why you talk about the dirtiest supply chain. And we seem to be in between a rock and a hard place, right? Because you might say, okay, well, if China's dominating this field, then let's switch. Let's forget about electric cars and go back to burning fossil fuels. Wouldn't that make sense?
Well, no. I don't think that I'm arguing against lithium-ion batteries at all. I mean, I think they're remarkable technology. Since they were developed in the 70s, you know, we wouldn't have cell phones if we didn't have lithium-ion batteries. We wouldn't have many of the things that make our lives possible in the way that we live them today. But what I'm saying is that this supply chain can be changed on the ground. It's actually quite, it requires investment, and it requires effort, and it requires a lot of, you know, hard work. But it's very clear what the roadmap to do this is. And, you know, there are political solutions which include, you know, going after the corrupt, and supporting free and fair elections and things like that. There are solutions that can be dealt with by businesses in terms of engagement with local communities. But what I would say is this is not an argument against lithium-ion batteries or electric vehicles at all. It's saying that this system can be cleaned up. I think it's very clear to many people how that can happen. Okay. So I wouldn't argue against electric vehicles at all, actually.
Well, I'm glad you ended on that solutions note, because I wanted to sort of emphasize that at the end of the conversation, because I know you've said in the past the book is not meant to be despairing. So we've got to the point where we've shown ways of improving the current situation. Thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas Niarchos joining us from the US. You're with Weekend from the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, and in People Fixing the World, Myra Anubi looks at new ways to tackle problems.
Can a pioneering programme inside Scotland's largest prison teach prisoners to be better dads?
We're allowing basically soft play between fathers and children.
People Fixing the World, Tuesday at 8:15 GMT. At bbc.com, Crowd Science.
How do fish recognise each other? Crowd Science listener Ian keeps tropical fish, and he's wondering how they know to stick with their own kind. To find out, we head to an aquarium to meet a remarkable fish that can recognise itself in the mirror.
This is the BBC World Service.